Good evening and welcome to our first budget presentation. I will turn it over to Dr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mrs. Kloss. We have handouts in the front. If you haven't gotten one, we can ask one of our administrators to send them around. Also, everything for this particular budget season will be posted up on our website. We have a web page that's dedicated to the budget. It'll have the presentations. It will have video from all of our meetings. It also has information about voting, absentee ballots, applications and petitions to run for the Board of Education, and information on STAR. So we're going to go through our initial first draft budget presentation, and then there will be time for the community to ask questions and interact with members of the Board of Education. There's really three parts to our agenda tonight in terms of explanation. We're going to review the governor's executive budget proposal. Normally, the governor's executive budget proposal is not available this early in January, but it came out a couple of weeks ago. We've had time to analyze it, so we're going to talk with our community about what the governor's proposal says. Normally, the governor's proposal is the floor for state aid increases, and then the Assembly and the Senate will work with him in terms of state school aid, and we won't know the ceiling on that until probably late March, early April. We want to talk just very briefly with our community about the process that we used to craft the first draft of the 2016-17 budget, and then present you very clearly with what the 2016-17 Clarence budget is all about. So, insofar as the overall state budget outlook, this should be a better year in New York State than some of the years in past. The state comptroller has verified that there's a surplus of at least $350 million for the state of New York for fiscal year 2016. Also, the total receipts for collecting of tax receipts for New York State is up by over $1 billion. The state Senate has called for a full restoration of the gap elimination adjustment in 2016-17, and we'll get into a little bit about what that means. The governor did not enact that recommendation in his budget. Two other groups that often chime in on the state budget. The Educational Conference Board is the State School Boards Association, the State Superintendents Association, the State Teachers Association, state business officials. They have deemed that an increase of $1.7 billion is needed in order to have schools operate at last year's levels into 2016-17. The Board of Regents recommended a higher overall increase in general operating aid at $2.2 billion. So, people were calling for close to $2 billion. The governor in his budget has put in $991 million for school aid increases. This has included an increase in foundation aid, some restoration of the gap elimination adjustment, fully funding expense-driven aids, which we'll describe in a couple of minutes. There's a brand new aid category this year of $100 million for community schools aid. The governor also is asking for increases to universal pre-kindergarten to start it with 3-year-olds rather than 4-year-olds as we currently do. Something called an early college high school, and also another UPK initiative. So 991 total for the governor's proposal for state aid across New York State. These are some other things that are not in the $991 million total. They are in addition to that. Number one, the governor has proposed to increase statewide funding for charter schools by $27 million. Normally, charter schools receive money from public schools that are the home base of kids that go to particular charter schools. In Clarence, we have a handful, Rick, 5 or 6 kids maybe?
Not even.
Not even?
3 or 4.
Less than 5 students who attend charter schools. The charter school bills us, we give them a tuition amount. This would be in addition to the billings that would happen from charter schools. The governor's calling for a $27 million increase. The governor is also calling for a $150 million increase in a series of programs which are described as education tax credits. $50 million in tax credits for corporations or individuals who want to provide scholarships to non-public schools, $70 million for families whose incomes are below $60,000 for tuition expenses to private schools, and $10 million for teachers in either private or public schools who spend money on supplies for their classroom up to a $200 credit per teacher. Governor also calls, in addition to these fundings, for $174 million to reimburse non-public schools for the cost of state-mandated activities, such as implementing the Common Core standards and providing state testing. So about $300 million for private schools, in addition to the $991 million for public schools. So a little bit of a summary. The governor's school aid proposal of $991 million falls well below the recommendations from the Educational Conference Board and the Board of Regents. It's less than half of what was called for by those particular entities. The governor's budget does not eliminate the gap elimination adjustment, which we'll describe in a little bit of detail later. It reduces it. It reduces it by $189 million of the grand total $434 million. In Clarence, it reduces it by about 30%. Foundation aid for many schools is essentially flat, as the foundation formula has not really run in its entirety since the 2008 school year. In the Clarence allocation for aid, we don't receive any additional aid for foundation aid from last year to this year. The governor's budget does fully fund expense-driven aids. Expense-driven aids are things like transportation, special education, BOCEs. They are areas in the budget where we spend money in one year and then we get back a proportion of it, about 60 cents on a dollar, the next year. And in some opening budgets that the governor has done over the years, he has not fully funded expense-driven aid, but in this budget he does, and that's a very good thing for the Clarence School District. It's about $300,000 worth. However, some of the things that are brand new in this budget, like tax credits, additional funding for charter schools and private schools, a whole new aid category of $100 million for community schools, without fully funding foundation aid or eliminating the gap elimination adjustment, ends up being a serious problem for school districts across New York State. This is a quick comparative chart. The first column talks about the area within the governor, or the area of the budget for New York State. The second column is what the Educational Conference Board was asking for. The third column is what the Regents was asking for, and the fourth column is what the governor actually has in his proposals. So in many cases, statewide agencies were calling for a much larger increase than the governor put in his budget. One thing to remember about the governor's budget and about formulas is that formulas are not always fair. Money does not always flow to school districts equitably. Money flows to school districts based on two elements: the income wealth of the people who live within the district. In other words, when you fill out your income tax forms, you check off a box that indicates that you live within the Clarence School District. The state takes that total of income wealth for the entire district as a variable, and also the property wealth of a school district. So the grand total assessed value of all the properties, commercial and residential, that make up a district. If the true aid formula really ran, there'd be close to 200 districts across New York State that are so wealthy they wouldn't receive any foundation aid at all. That doesn't include Clarence. Clarence may be considered a wealthy district in Western New York, but it is not considered a wealthy district statewide. However, these 199 districts do get foundation aid at this point in time. Instead of fixing the formula over the years, the formula has been tweaked by the legislature. Other aids were created in the formula to push money towards school districts that may not get it through foundation aid. An example is high tax aid. There's $223 million in the current system that goes to school districts that have very high taxes. There's no aid that goes to school districts that have very low taxes, but there is aid that goes to school districts that have high taxes. Another anomaly in the funding formula, foundation aid never goes down, it only goes up, and if something happens in your school district that would have caused the foundation aid to go down, you are held harmless at the prior year's level. There are a number of districts across New York State that are held harmless. Clarence isn't one of them. About 216 districts get more foundation aid than the formula would normally allow for them to get because of that particular variable. If the formula ran the way it was supposed to, then Clarence would receive $1.8 million in GEA restoration and a little under $1 million in foundation aid. So we would have an increase in this particular school year of $2.8 million. That's not what the governor is proposing. So that's a little bit about the executive budget and where it stands. We'll talk a little bit about its impact on Clarence when we get into this particular chunk of the slides, which is the budget development process. So overall, we start this year in much the same way as we have started the past 5 years for budgeting. We have an overall philosophy from the Board of Education and the administration, and that is, number one, we want to protect the core programs of the district. We ask ourselves a question: what do we want Clarence to be? And we try to look beyond just the numbers to the opportunities that should be available for kids within our district. The reasons why many people chose to educate their kids in Clarence and buy their houses in Clarence. So a key priority for the board: protect the core programs of the district. And the budget that we're going to recommend to the board tonight does that, reaches that particular goal. The second goal is an equally important goal. We want to exhibit fiscal responsibility with people's tax dollars. So we have to understand the environment that we live in, locally, statewide, and nationally, and we have to be sensitive to the issue of tax fatigue, and we have to be transparent and communicate with people about exactly what the school district requires. So we always start our budget process with these two goals, and we try to bring a budget in that our community can vote on that meets both of those mandates. We're going to talk a little bit about the revenue side of the budget first, and then the expense side of the budget. Then we'll end up with the grand total of where everything fits together. So on the revenue side of the budget, there's really three places where the school district receives revenue. The large majority of funding for the Clarence School District comes from local property taxpayers. Probably close to 70%, would you say, Rick, comes from local property taxpayers. Some of our money comes from New York State. About probably 25% of the funding for the school district comes from New York State. And then the other large source of revenue for the school district is sales tax. We live in a county that shares sales tax revenue with schools. Not every county across New York State does that, so we're fortunate, and we get a sizable chunk, about $5 million, Rick, in revenue from sales tax. Some updates on the revenue situation just in general. There were huge reductions in state aid starting in 2009, and even though New York State has come out of the Great Recession somewhat, school aid has not. There were some temporary federal grants called federal stabilization aid that came in 2010 and 2011, and those were exhausted in 2011, and then they kind of fell off by the wayside. In addition, there's a cap on future growth in aid that's set in policy under the New York State governmental system. The gap elimination adjustment was started 7 years ago as a way to take back money from school districts in order to shrink the deficit that the state experienced as a result of the Great Recession, and we have not yet recovered from that. As of this point in time, Clarence has $1.8 million removed from its state aid formula as part of the gap elimination adjustment. And foundation aid this year, even in the governor's proposed budget, is 7% lower than if the proper formula was actually calculated, and that's about $1 million differential. This is a quick chart that shows the Board of Ed the 7-year history of the gap elimination adjustment. So every year, it has been in the $1 million plus range for the Clarence Central School District. Some school districts in the past 3 years have had all of their gap elimination adjustment money returned to them. Many school districts across New York State have not. School districts that are like Clarence have the largest outstanding gap elimination adjustment. So last year it was at $1.8 million. This year in the executive budget it would remain at $1.2 million. The actual amount that would come back to the school district would be about $550,000 of that $1.8 million. So in the last 7 years, there's just under $21 million kind of left on the table. This chart shows what the total gap elimination adjustment was in millions over the course of its lifetime. It has decreased substantially in New York State, but in some districts it has not decreased as widely. And Clarence is one of those districts. There's $434 million left to completely eradicate the gap elimination adjustment. The governor's budget asks for about 40% of that, and for Clarence it would be about 30%. So the gap elimination adjustment is an issue for us. It's money that we consider the state owes the school district, yet it has not been fully returned. We were kind of counting on at least half of it coming back this year, and it puts us in a difficult situation. In addition, on the revenue side, the property tax cap constrains the amount of revenue that can be raised. So we have kept tax increases relatively low over the past 7 years, and we're going to show you a chart that proves that point. And each year that the property tax cap has been in existence, Clarence has been either at or below the level of the property tax cap. And our recommendation for 2016-17 is that we would be below the property tax cap as well. The property tax cap is formulated for districts based on a number of different factors, which we'll talk about in a second. Some people tend to think that it is a hard number at 2%. It is not. It has 3 basic variables to it that we'll describe. There's been limited action for the New York State government on mandate relief, and there have been many new expensive mandates over the past couple of years, not the least of which is the Common Core and teacher evaluations and state testing. So here's some assumptions that we make in the beginning of the budget process on the revenue side of the budget. First, we anticipate an increase in sales tax of about 1%. That's a conservative estimate, and we think that it's going to fall within that particular number. So that's about $50,000. Local revenues, which are those properties that have a, in lieu of tax payment rather than having to pay the whole tax rate, or miscellaneous sources like fees and things that we require for the school district, we think those revenues will remain flat. They will be the same in next year's budget as they were in this year's budget. One of the other pieces of revenue that we often put into the budget is any surplus that happens from one year to the next. When the school district ends with a surplus, in other words, we didn't spend all the money that we had allocated in the budget, we can really do 2 things with that money. We can apply it to reduce the tax levy in the next year. That's called an appropriated fund balance. We can hold on to some of it for a rainy day fund. We're not supposed to exceed 4% of our total budget in order to do that. Or we could place it in some reserves for future use. What we're going to do is appropriate another $150,000. This will bring us to about $2 million annually that we appropriate as surplus from one year's budget to the next year's budget. We really don't want to go any higher than that. Right now, we are estimating the tax levy cap to be 2.99% based on current trends. We can't give the community or the board a hard final number until March 1st. We won't know all of the details until then. But this is a good estimate based on our expert Rick Mancuso's calculations. There's basically three things that go into this particular number. One is the cost of living increase, the growth in the cost of living increase for New York State for 1 year. We know that number is 0.12%. That was just provided to us. One other number that we're allowed to add to this particular tax cap is the growth in assessed valuation for new builds in the town of Clarence. What was that one, Rick? About 1.4%? 1.29%. So the new builds and new things that have come onto the assessment rolls in Clarence, you're allowed to add to the tax levy cap. The other big chunk is the amount of debt that the school district has taken on. And we've taken on additional debt with a building project that was voted on by the community, so the state allows you to put that extra debt onto the tax cap. And that equates to about what, Rick?
About 0.7%.
About 0.7%. So if you put those things together, we're at 2.99%. We actually think the real tax cap number is going to come in higher than that, but this is and by about 1/10, maybe 2/10 of a point. But this is a number that we're comfortable setting it at and providing to our community and to our board right now because we believe it will be under the tax cap level for 2016-17. So at 2.99%, that tax revenue would generate about $1.3 million for the budget. And then school aid, when you take into account what the governor has in his run, and we always budget the governor's numbers in the first budget run, that's about another $670,000. So on the revenue side for state aid, this is what we're anticipating. We're not getting any additional foundation aid. Our expense-driven aids are about $264,000. Our hardware, software, textbook, library aid says it's going up by $135,000, but we think that estimate is high, and we're not counting on all of that. We're counting on a little bit of it, but not all of it. For universal pre-K, the Clarence School District gets $243,000 from New York State. We turn around and we give that money to the 4 providers that we have for universal pre-K. So that money is like a grant. It's really money in and money out. And then for the gap elimination adjustment, the state still owes us $1.2 million. We get back $558,000 under the governor's budget. So that's how the state aid piece works. That's the revenue side of the budget. And those are the revenues that we anticipate and that we've built into the first draft. Now, for the expense side of the budget, what's going on that side? Well, overall, our wages are up about 3%. That would include teachers, administrators, service employees. Salaries and benefits comprise about 75% of all of our expenses. Our retirement system costs are down slightly. The teachers' retirement system and the employees' retirement system for New York State have both decreased their rates. That's good news. For years they went up. The last couple of years they've come down, and that represents a containment in costs for the school district. Our special education costs are up about 1% overall. They're very difficult to nail down on the exact number, but we think this is a conservative, good estimate to have. Our debt service is up a little over $500,000, primarily because of new debt issues that we have for our capital project. Now, correspondingly, we will get back state aid that offsets a portion of that debt, about 70% of it. Our healthcare expenses were estimated to increase by double digits, but we have a self-funded healthcare initiative that our employees' unions have agreed to. And by being in that self-funding initiative, which essentially means we act as our own insurer and we contract with Independent Health as our third-party agency to administer, our healthcare expenses are going to be at 5% year over year. All employee groups contribute more towards healthcare starting this year. All other costs in our budget, whether it's BOCES, utilities, supplies, equipment, anything else, we put up about 1%. So this is the summary of all the expense side items in our budget. We've done some things to mitigate expense side items with efficiency measures. We share our transportation supervisor with Akron, 60-40 split. That has worked out well for the past 3 years, and it's mostly because our transportation supervisor is a highly efficient employee. We are in a couple of cooperatives for purchasing, for school insurance, for workers' compensation. We purchase through the BOCES and a regional energy cooperative and get good prices on things like fuel oil and heating. And we have electrical and HVAC savings with new equipment that's going to be part of our capital project. And when that is completely finished after 3 phases, 2 years from now, those savings will be built in. So this chart gives the board and the community an 8-year look at spending and tax levy increases in the Clarence School District. When you take the 8-year averages, we average about 1.7% spending increase, 1.7% tax levy increase over the past 8 years. In the 2 years that there has been a rebate on people's property taxes, we have qualified for that rebate. So in 2014-15, any increase in school taxes were rebated to homeowners. In 2015-16, although you haven't gotten your checks yet, the state says they're in the mail. For 2015-16, we also were below the cap and people qualified for the rebate. Our reading of the governor's budget is that this rebate program is in effect for 16-17, and we will qualify for the rebate program, and everyone should get the increase in their taxes rebated back to them. You can see the way we've used the appropriated fund balance over the years. At one point we were very high, now we're back at about $2 million per year, a sustainable number. One thing that we've done on the expense side is in years where we had difficulties meeting our budget goals, we had to make reductions. And this table gives you an idea of the reductions that were made in 2011-12, 12-13, and 13-14. There were non-personnel cuts, there were people cuts of teachers, administrators, and service employees. 2 years ago in 2014-15, we did not make any reductions in the budget, and we restored all funding for clubs and sports, which had been graciously donated to us for a year by our foundation. Then last year we had no reductions, but because we did receive more state aid, we were able to restore 11 teaching positions. So this is the grand totals after 5 years on this particular side of the expense budget. A little bit of an update on our school district and the things that make our school district unique and we think make it a great value. Our goals in the budget this year are the same as they've been for the past 2 years. We will have no staff reductions, and we want to maintain all of our existing programs. Now, in this particular budget, we make some assumptions in order to do that, and we're going to be very clear with the Board of Education about what those assumptions are. If all of those assumptions don't come true, we're going to have to finagle things and move some things around, but we do not foresee a scenario where we're going to have to reduce staff or reduce programs at this point in time. The capped tax levy alone will not provide us with enough funds to restore personnel or programs that have been reduced over the years. However, we are committed to having a budget that is at or below the cap. And in order for us to even consider restoring things, we're going to have to get more state aid than is in the governor's budget right now. So given where the governor's budget is, we're at a place where we have no staff reductions and we maintain programs in our budget, but we don't bring anything back. So some things about our kids and about our school district that I think are worth mentioning. This is based on last year's senior class. 65% of the kids in that senior class earned an advanced designation Regents diploma, which means they took extra math and extra science, scored higher on their Regents exams in order to earn that credential. That's one of the highest levels in New York State. 95% of our kids last year indicated to us that they were going to go to a 2 or a 4-year college. We have a nationally recognized music program with 30 performing groups and over 1,600 participants. We, for the most part, have reasonable class sizes at our elementary schools. There are some grades that have bubbles, and they are larger, but we try to keep K through 2 class sizes at 22 to 23, and we try to keep grade 4 and 5, grade 3 to 5 class sizes at 23 to 25. We have 60 elective course offerings at Clarence High School, which our kids take advantage of. A couple years ago, we started the National Finance and Business Academy. Last year was our initial graduation cohort of 27 kids. They have an internship experience and experience interacting with local businesses, and they're well on their way to having that type of a career in college. Project Lead the Way fully certified 30 graduates last year. They've been in that range for the past 3 or 4 years. This is a great pre-engineering program for kids. Many of the graduates from our program have gone on to earn college degrees in engineering. We have 19 advanced placement and 12 college level course offerings at Clarence High School. And we have a full athletic program with 69 teams and over 1,700 participants. Plus 60 extracurricular club organizations at Clarence Middle School and Clarence High School for kids to be a part of. We think these are the kind of things that set Clarence apart from other school districts in our region and certainly in our state. Some other facts and figures about our school district. Clarence is the #1 overall cost-effective district out of 96 Western New York districts, according to Business First. Clarence is second overall in cost effectiveness out of 426 upstate districts, upstate being everything east of the Hudson, or everything west of the Hudson River. We are 6th in administrative efficiency in Western New York. 8th in administrative efficiency in all of upstate New York, according to Business First. 2nd lowest per pupil spending in Western New York. 5th lowest per pupil spending in all of upstate New York. And we have the 2nd lowest full value tax rate in Western New York as well. So that's some of the cost efficiency pieces. These are some of the student achievement positions, which speak highly of our teaching staff. We have the 3rd highest academic ranking in Western New York. We have the #1 school district for English and science in Western New York, the #2 school district for math, the #15 district for social studies. All 6 of our schools are on the honor roll for Business First. We have the best athletic program in Western New York, according to Business First. And most recently, this is the most recent statistic that was published, there's a statistic for college readiness. It's called the Aspirational Performance Measure. It calculates the number of students who have reached the scores on Regents English and math exams deemed by New York State to be worthy of success in college and beyond. There's only 3 school districts in all of New York State that had more than 80% of their kids with an aspirational performance measure of college readiness, and Clarence was the 3rd, Pittsford was the 1st, and Orchard Park was the 2nd. So that speaks really highly of our teaching staff. So with those things said about the school district, here's some things about where the 2016-17 budget stands, and then we'll take some questions from the audience for the board or for me. Our tax levy will be at the cap level. As a matter of fact, we think we will be below the cap level for our tax levy. The exact cap number we cannot give you until after March 1st. But at this point, we're saying 2.99%. There will be no budget reductions of any kind, including staff reductions, in this particular draft of the budget. We're anticipating 10 teacher retirements, and we've built those numbers into the budget. The teachers don't have to let us know about their retirements until February 1st under their contract. We may not get to 10 teacher retirements. If we don't get to 10, we're going to have to rearrange some things on the expense side of our budget. Our wages are up 3%. Our pension costs are decreased slightly. Our debt service is up according to the new issues. All of our other expenses are at 1%, healthcare at 5%. We're going to use a combination of state aid and miscellaneous revenues to stay within the tax cap for 2016-17. And we are recommending to the Board of Education that in this particular budget, we consider staying on our course of annual bus purchases. A little bit less than what we've planned, but we still think we need to buy buses this year. So, here's the first draft of the 2016-17 budget. Last year our budget was $75.3 million. A tax levy increase at the capped number of 2.99% will yield about $1.3 million. Our other revenues, including Medicare interest, state sales or state aid and sales tax, gets us about $912,000. We are appropriating an additional $150,000 in fund balance. That gets us to next year's number of $77.7 million total in the budget. Insofar as the bus purchase, this is what we're recommending. 3 big buses without luggage racks, 2 big buses with luggage racks, 1 brand new wheelchair van, and 3 30-passenger buses for a grand total of about $822,000. Last year's purchase was about $990,000. So we are kind of readjusting, and this is lower, and that will be somewhat of a savings in the debt service, although it really won't affect 2016-17. It's worth pointing out, we believe this is in the governor's budget. It's written in the governor's stuff that he wrote up on his budget, but he has not emphasized it, but we do believe it's there. All homeowners will receive a rebate if the school budget stays within the property tax cap, and this one does in this draft, and there won't be a draft where it doesn't. And the school district puts forth a compliant efficiency plan to save 1% of our tax levy in the following 3 years. We've already had that plan approved by New York State, so it's in effect. So everyone should get a rebate on their taxes. The increase, without taking into account the new assessed valuations, the increase on a $200,000 home in this particular budget is about $56 a year. So that's where we stand on January 25th in our first budget draft. Our next budget meeting is on February 22nd, and that is traditionally when we will where we will provide our community with all of our enrollment projections. And in addition, we'll know for sure where we stand on teacher retirements at that point. There may be some other revenues that come into focus. And we'll also have talked to our legislators, Jane Corwin and Mike Ranzenhofer, about their point of view in trying to secure more state aid for the Clarence School District. Then on March 14th, we have our third and final open budget forum, and you can see our regular board meeting dates as well, where the community can ask questions about budget and have the Board of Education respond. So, Ms. Klaas, if it's okay with you, we will accept questions from the community at this point.
Okay.
We just ask that you come up and use one of the microphones because we're recording this session and we'd like to get that on the record. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to have answered?
I'm going to address this question to President Kloss. Where is the 1% savings in the tax levy as a result of enacting last year's efficiency plan, which was required by the New York State tax freeze credit law?
The 1% could be comprised of reductions that are made actually over the number of the last couple of years in reducing what would be our budget.
Okay, so I noticed there was no presentation tonight on the actual numbers of the tax levy. So where do we find that, the number of last year's tax levy and what this year's tax levy is going to be, so that we can determine that there was in fact a 1%? Is it a savings or is it a reduction? I would like to address this question to Mrs. Kloss because the board is the one that votes on the budget.
Well, thank you for your confidence. The tax levy is common knowledge. That information has already been produced for you for last year. We won't have a confirmed tax levy for the budget we're working on right now until we know exactly where we are for the tax cap, what amount of funds that we can raise through taxes.
Okay, so where does that 1% go? Is it reduced taxes, or is it put in a savings that the school district holds?
Well, we can't hold a savings account. We can't, school districts can't have a savings account that we can save for rainy days. We budget, and if there are funds left over, we can appropriate them for the current year's reduction of the tax levy and the funds that are raised. But we can't put money aside for a savings, called a savings account. We can't hold any more than 4% in our fund balance.
Okay, understood. So there's not necessarily going to be a tax decrease with this 1% efficiency plan.
There will be, in terms of, are you talking about the tax levy, or are you talking about?
I'm talking about actual dollars spent by the average homeowner in Clarence.
No.
Okay. Don't you think that's a little deceiving when that's posted up there? They see 1% decrease in the tax levy, and to the average layperson, that would mean that they're going to get a tax decrease.
You will get a tax rebate for the difference because of the efficiencies.
Correct, but that rebate is separate from the efficiency plan that the school district implemented.
Well, in order to qualify for the rebate, we have to have an efficiency plan put in place. They're not two separate. They won't happen separately.
Okay. So I guess you answered my question in the fact that it's almost a gimmick where you present this to the public and you say, we're going to make our budget, we're going to make the amount of money that we take from the taxpayers in Clarence, we're going to reduce that by 1% for the next 3 years if you pass this budget, when in effect they're really not going to see any savings to it.
Well, we look for savings opportunities within the budget, but there has never been a year over year where the total budget has gone down, unless we're counting the years where we've had a massive reduction in state aid. There's, I mean, in your own household, in year over year, there are cost increases, your health insurance, your food costs, your taxes. There's never a point where it goes down year over year, unless you reduce the size where you live or cut out something.
Well, the Clarence district does have a declining enrollment.
Well, actually, our next year's budget for next year's students is actually going higher.
Okay. Would any other member of the board care to weigh in on that?
If I could,
Sure.
just very briefly. I mean, part of the cost savings element is also, it's not necessarily, you know, if you're talking about some expenses increase over time, in some cases, the idea is reducing the growth of those expenses over time. So if you see, just to take a simple example, you know, if we weren't in our current self-funding health program, the expectation is that we would be seeing, you know, a 10% growth in those expenses over time. So we implement something that we think is as effective from a delivery of healthcare for the employees as that other program, but it's 5% cheaper. So you know, you take that reduction in cost, and if you span that over a number of years, the expense could be substantially higher, but we deflected that cost, so it's a lower growth than you would see otherwise. And that's the kind of savings that we've looked at, and I think is part of this.
And that's what qualifies for the efficiency credit.
Okay, so just to reiterate, we won't necessarily see a 1% decrease if I look at a spreadsheet with last year's tax levy and this year's tax levy.
Well, we don't know that what the tax levy was going to be yet.
Well, Dr. Hicks is saying no. Go ahead.
The thing that you're referring to, Mr. Lombardo, is New York State's plan for rebating taxes, rebating increases in taxes year over year to residents. So in order to qualify, a school district has to have done two things. Number one, they have to be under the levy on the capped number.
Right.
And number two, they have to demonstrate this savings. The school district can demonstrate the savings by itself, or it can demonstrate the savings in conjunction with everyone in the BOCES. We chose to do it in conjunction with everyone in the BOCES. So, Rick?
Sure, and what we're trying to say is, what Mr. Stock said is true. A lot of it is cost avoidance, so there's our costs that we do not have to incur because of efficiencies we put in. If you look at Dr. Hicks' slide, where it starts off with the $75 million of our current budget, the second line in says what the estimate from this draft will raise the tax levy for this year.
Right.
So it's very clear that our estimate in this draft shows a tax levy increase of about $1.3 million. And that would be that 2.99% estimate.
And in the program that you were referencing, Mr. Lombardo, the savings that has to be shown is equivalent to what a percent on the tax levy would be. It doesn't actually reduce the tax levy. So that's...
Well, you know, I'll read what it says verbatim on the paper.
Right.
The school district puts forward a compliant efficiency plan to save 1% of their tax levies in each of the following 3 years.
Right. And those are the words from the governor's proposal. And we used them. But that particular plan allows us to qualify for residents to get their rebates.
So it's unclear as it's written on the paper. This is,
I don't think it's unclear, but if it could be clearer, we will revise it for the next meeting.
yeah, I certainly would, just for everybody's sake.
Sure.
I think the point is of that, if we didn't do those efficiencies, then the levy would be 1% higher.
Right.
Basically, that's the general principle of, I think, the governor's intent.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Murphy?
Yes, number one, on the school buses, didn't we buy 372 or more buses last year?
Yes, we did.
And we're buying 3 more this year.
Correct.
And how many buses are we going to have in all?
In total, we have 99 buses. And
Same as last year?
yes,
Okay.
what these buses will represent aren't new buses to the extent of adding to the fleet, but they will be replacing the very oldest buses in the fleet that are costing us too much, and we have trouble getting past the DOT inspections.
Please talk into the microphone, Mr. Murphy. Please speak into the microphone because it's being
Well,
recorded.
it's kind of hard. I got a bad back, so I've
You
been
can take
standing
the
up here quite
microphone
a
out if
while
you'd
trying
like.
to do it. All right, I have one more thing I want to read off of what we determined by the tax assessments. You're claiming that the tax assessments are only going up, how much did you say per house?
Are you referring to the way we calculate the levy,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
1.29%, and that's a number given to us from the state.
That would be...
Well, I show here on Rock Oak, in phase 1, they're going up $79, which is a 19% increase. In phase 2, we're going up $260, which is a 66% increase. In phase 3, they're going up 127%. Now, we are taking a big rent increase on
Right.
these.
So can I try to clarify?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think what you're referring to is the assessed value of the properties within Rock Oak. That's not the number we're referring to. We're referring to new builds and new houses or commercial properties that come onto the tax rolls during the fiscal year.
So you're not counting any, the raise in assessments by?
We will count the raise in assessments when we calculate the tax rate. To calculate the tax levy, we don't consider the raise in assessed values. To calculate the rate, which is going to impact the total dollar value that Mr. Lombardo was speaking about, we will take that into account. And this year, the tax rate was lower than it was last year, and much lower than what we had predicted it to be. So when you have increases in assessed value for properties that are already on the tax rolls, that affects the tax rate. When you have new builds and new houses and new commercial property coming on to the tax rolls, that affects the tax levy.
You're telling me that my house, it doesn't count anymore, is what you're saying?
No, I don't believe I was saying that, so let me try to be a little clear. The total assessed value of your property is created by the town of Clarence. We will take the total assessed value increases of everybody's property into effect when we establish the tax rate for the 2016-17 budget, but we won't do that until August because the town will not be able to give us all those assessed values until then. But this is the way that it works. The higher the assessed values go up, the lower the tax rate goes down.
That's right.
So it has that inverse relationship to it.
Okay. Another thing I wanted to, most of us are retired that live in Rock Oak.
Yes, sir.
We're not getting any increase in our Social Security. Our medical insurance went up 25%. Our water rates went up 3%. Our other costs are going up. I hope you people take that into consideration when you figure the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Murphy.
Hi, I am not an accountant or a numbers person in any way, so forgive me as I struggle
Sure.
to try to understand some of this. But it seems that since the assessments went up and the school taxes are based on the assessments, that you must either have received or will receive a significant windfall from the assessments being raised across the board in the town. Is that not correct?
That is not correct.
Okay.
So I'll explain it. Please finish your question.
No, go ahead, please.
Is that it? There's two numbers. One is the tax levy. That's the total amount of money that we must raise in order to make the budget work. So let me show you a slide and explain it that way. So our budget for next year, we're proposing at $77.7 total million. The way we're getting there is start with this year's budget, add to it the total amount of money that we intend to raise in taxes, that's $1.3 million.
Okay.
Use those other revenue sources, and that gets us to 77.7. This is regardless. We have to raise $1.3 million in taxes regardless of what the assessed values of people's homes are. However, when you apportion that $1.3 million over all of the assessed values in the town of Clarence and the other towns that make up our school district, that takes into account the assessed values of those particular properties. When those assessed values go up, that number of 1.3 million does not change. The levy is the levy is the levy. We need to raise the 1.3 million. How we raise it is by establishing a per thousand tax rate that is based on the assessed value of your home. When the value of your home increases, and it's the town of Clarence that does that, then
understand.
the tax rate likely goes down. However, we still need to raise that 1.3 million. It doesn't matter if everyone's assessed values went up or if everyone's assessed values went down. That levy number doesn't change. What changes is the assessed values of people's homes. When they go way up, like they did last year, the total dollar per thousand number goes down. Maybe. Well, depending upon the value of your home.
All right, so you are saying that if my assessment was $125,000 and it is now $150,000, that I am not paying any more taxes on that property?
Well, I don't think what I'm saying is, our estimate right now, if everything held true and nobody's assessed value went up at all,
All right,
our estimate is that this number of $1.3 million would, on an average $200,000 home, would be about $56. Okay, we're saying that will be an increase in people's taxes.
okay.
Now, if your home goes up and your neighbor's doesn't go up, and somebody down the street from you goes up 3 times, and somebody across the street goes down, that is going to be apportioned differently, and that $56 is going to look a little different among those others. But if we just did apples to apples, even if your assessment went up, we would be expecting you to pay about $56 additionally next year.
Okay.
However, sometimes it works to the benefit where it's not that high.
All right, well, last year mine went up about $350. So are you saying next year, and I live in that $150,000 home. So
Sure.
I live in a very modest home
Yes.
for this area. So you're saying that next year, the average Clarence resident should only expect another $56 after the $350
That's correct.
and the year after that?
Well, the year after that, we haven't done yet, but we've
Okay.
done 2016, 17.
Is that a pattern that, I mean, can I expect my taxes to go up another $56
In
every
17.
year going forward ad nauseum?
Well, I guess the best way for me to address it is this. We expect our expenses to go up every year, depending upon what the state does. See, there's other places in there. That will determine how big the levy is. And will it go up every year? We anticipate that it will go up a little bit every year. Are we trying to mitigate it and keep it as low as possible? We are trying to do that.
Okay.
So if your house was reassessed last year, the chances of it being reassessed this year are very small. As a matter of fact, it usually only happens once every 3 to 5 years.
Oh, yeah, probably more than
Is
that.
it every 4 years, Mr.? All right, so the chances that your house will be reassessed this year, low. Okay? However, the rate, we cannot calculate until we know all of that information. But every year we publish a rate thinking it's going to be one thing, and it ends up always being lower. And that translates to lower dollars per family. So it's not us that assesses your home.
I completely understand that. I'm just saying that because assessments were raised, it makes sense to me that you
Right.
received a significant
Yeah.
windfall
And it's,
from that.
that's an incorrect assumption.
All right.
We have to raise that 1.3 million no matter what happens to assessments.
Okay.
Okay?
If I can take a try, the last year, the overall assessments, if I remember correctly, went up about 7% on average for the entire town. So if your individual house went up more than 7%, then you'll likely be paying more in taxes.
Oh, I am.
Yeah, and if you're, because the example you gave, $25,000 on from 125 to 150, that would be a 20% increase in your assessed value. So you'd be paying more taxes. If your house was, during the reassessment, went up 0% or 2%, then you'd actually could be paying less tax this year than you paid the year before because the rate has gone down a little bit. So basically, last year, that 7% was the average for the entire town. So if you went up more than that, you're paying more. If you went up less than that, then you could actually be paying lower tax.
Yeah,
this year.
I am not paying lower taxes.
And-
It's gone up
Yeah, a lot of,
significantly,
a
both
lot
the
of people
school
are in
taxes.
that
and the property
position.
taxes.
Yeah, we don't have any control over how the town did that,
I do understand that.
but that's the effect of it.
If I'm not mistaken, state mandated that reassessment,
Well, they require a reassessment, you know, at a,
and no elected officials represented us to push that back.
Well, in order to maintain 100% valuation, there's particular guidelines that need to be met. And 100% evaluation is a good thing because that's a fair share for everyone based on the true value of their home. There's many towns that don't have it, and if we didn't have that, we'd have something called equalization rates, which would mess with people's taxes.
I have a second question, if I
Sure.
may, and again, I am not an accountant what has happened to the transportation budget with the cost of gas dropping so dramatically? I would think that would be a significant savings, or maybe to you folks, that's just a drop in the, Gas tank.
Certainly we are saving money from what we budgeted.
okay, and what
this year.
happens to that savings, I guess is my.
So each year, Dr. Hicks mentioned, we try to recover a couple $1 million from both sides of the budget so that we can offset taxes. And, you know, the $150,000 that we're going to increase, part of it is going to come from the savings that we anticipate from fuel costs being lower.
All right, okay. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead, Ellie? You can, go ahead.
I don't have so much as a question as I have a comment. And, you know, all this sounds very good, the expenses, the savings, but the fact of the matter is, our taxes are going up every year. I did a study of a lot of houses in Clarence. I went to the link, and the approximate or the average increase in taxes was about $100 a year. That's a significant amount. I think it is for me anyway. I'm also a senior. I agree with Jim. We didn't get any cost of living increase this year. Not that it would be able to pay higher taxes with it anyway. It's so minimal. But I was hoping that since the CPI is 0.012%, and since our contribution
Please speak into the microphone so people in the back
Since the
can hear you.
contribution to the pension fund is lower than normal, and since you projected a decline in enrollment according to your graphs in the Clarence website, I was honestly hoping that the tax cap would be below the 2%, which is very misleading since you can add things onto it. I know 2.99% is lower than it's been a lot of the other years, but it is still an increase. We really need a break. My assessment went up quite a bit, so my taxes went up quite a bit. Property taxes go up every year because of the school budgets, because they increase every year. Please, give us a break.
Thank you, Mrs. Corcoran.
Just one more thing then. I'll give you a breakdown of the millions of dollars that our phase one went up to $5 million versus $3 million in 2001. Phase two, a total of 4 tracks, went up to $6,460,000 versus 3.8 million in 2011. Phase three went to 2,200,000 versus 1,200,000. That's because of the new houses coming in. Phase three is our latest addition. So you understand where we're coming from as far as getting a raise in our rents and in the taxes overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is another question that I'll direct directly to the board. Anybody who'd like to chime in. couple months ago, I asked what the net increase in dollars the new CTA contract would have on this year's budget, and more importantly, budgets 5 to 10 years in the future. Dr. Hicks said there was a definite increase in the cost from the last contract, but did not know the approximate dollar amount. No one could give me an answer then, so I will ask again now. What is the dollar amount increase of this new contract? There were 5 members on the board that voted in favor of it. If you don't know, just say you don't know.
Are you asking what the net increase over what we would have experienced without negotiating the new contract was?
I'm asking what the net dollar amount is from the last year of the last contract to the first year of this contract. And I would also be curious to know how much of that $75 million is for solely the CTA contract.
I don't have the exact numbers, but referencing some of the numbers in the presentation, we are a service business. 75% of the $75 million budget is salaries and support costs of taxes and so forth. As far as the increase, the wages, as noted in the presentation, are going up roughly 3% year over year. That is an all-in cost that takes into account teachers moving from step to step, what was in the contract before, what was negotiated. As far as the exact impact, and the reason there is a little bit of, we don't know the exact number, there was another line in there talking about retirements. Every time we have a retirement and we replace a tenured teacher that has been in the district for 20 years plus with somebody that is out of school or 5 years of experience, we're paying that teacher less. We're anticipating 10 retirements. We don't know that exact number. We won't know that for a couple weeks. And once we get all of those things buttoned up, we could give you a firm number.
I think, Joe,
How much, oh, go ahead.
my bad memory serves me correctly, I think we were in the $1 million a year range is what we thought total cost of the package was. It was right around that. For the
Ballpark.
3
I'd say
years.
maybe 900,000, but yes.
Yeah, it was in that range.
So $1 million.
Total cost, that was everything. That includes benefits, et cetera.
Okay, and does that include pensions, seeing as though pensions are based on salary?
Yes.
Our pension contribution, yes.
Right.
That was an
Okay.
estimate, because,
We didn't know
the
the rate.
pension rates change every year, right, Dr. Hicks?
Mhm.
That's
So-
correct.
It's just concerning to me that there are 5 members on the board that voted for this contract and didn't know what the financial repercussions were going to be. And as I recall, when everybody was running for a position on the school board, the term rubber stamp came up. And everybody on the school board sat there and shook their head and said, oh, we're not going to be rubber stamps. We're going to do our due diligence, and we're going to make sure we consider all points when we make the decisions. And unfortunately, again, we didn't see that here.
Well, I beg to differ. We all knew it at the time, and we'd be happy as we get firmer numbers, as we get into determining whether there will be 10 retirements, to be able to tell you that. But to sit there and say that we didn't know what we were doing and we just rubber stamped is incorrect, and I need to correct you on that.
Well, that's why I just asked what the cost of the new contract
And we just
would be.
explained why we won't know until we know for sure with regard to retirements.
Don't you think it's a little unsafe to vote? How much swing are we talking here? Millions of dollars, hundreds of dollars?
Here's what's fair to say, Mr. Lombard. I think you ask a fair question. Here's what's fair to say. Prior to the time that the Board of Education voted on the contract, they were provided with a spreadsheet that had all the numbers on it and costed everything out. It costed out the health care, it costed out the salaries, it costed out the benefits. Now, to ask them, 4 or 5 months after the fact, to recall a particular number, I'm not so sure is fair. However, what Mr. Showalter referred to with the $900,000 figure is within the general ballpark of what the teacher's contract was going to cost. But it's fair to say this, and I know it because we provided it to them, they had every single cost out and they knew exactly what the financial numbers were when that was voted on.
Yeah, Joe, to be fair, our memories aren't the best, and we do see a lot of numbers. I mean, that number kind of sticks a little bit, but The exact numbers, we don't remember exactly, but that's the ballpark.
I
We
can
do
tell
know
you,
ballpark.
that night, if you would have asked that particular question at that board
I-
meeting,
I
people would
did.
have known.
I did that back in October.
I think we had it on, displayed and everything, right? So, but,
Okay, well,
but I mean, I think, at the time, the question was raised, hey, if I remember right, we thought the package, that the new teachers' union contract was gonna cost us 4.3% a year on average over 3 years. And so there was one of our concerns was, are we gonna be able to sustain that over long term when we're talking about, 2-3% a year, the ability to raise, our income levels. So that was, we discussed it quite a bit, and it was a concern of ours. And, obviously, looking at some of the numbers, we need things to fall right to make it all work.
We also provided the board with a 5-year cost out going forward with some estimates about what state aid was needed in order to make everything work on the budget.
The other thing that contributed to some of the cost estimates was the higher contribution for teachers for their health insurance.
and how much is that? Because the slide just said that they're contributing more. How much is
Right.
that?
It increases over the life of the contract,
Okay,
and by the end of the 3 years, it'll be 12% for the teachers, 88% for the district.
okay, so that's up 2%?
That's correct.
Okay, what's the average cost for a teacher's health care plan?
Well, it's difficult to know, to say average. We'd have to give you a family versus a single.
Okay. Well, for argument's sake, $10,000 plan, you're talking 2%, that's $200. Big whoop-de-doo. You're turning around and you're giving the teachers several $1,000 raises. They're laughing in your face. I know it's going to be an unpopular thing to say, but you don't even specify on the presentation how much the teachers are going to pay more. And quite frankly, I think that's done on purpose.
Well, to be fair, Joe, all that information is available on our school website, the whole contract is.
The new contract is not posted.
Right. Right. The new contract is still undergoing the granular change in the language revisions. It will be there soon.
Yeah, so it is not available at the time.
Okay, fair enough.
Did you have a question, Mr. Lombard?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
I think I've done enough damage.
I don't mean to attack anybody on the board. I know you have a very difficult job. But the teachers did get a very significant raise, which you voted for, or at least 5 of you voted for. The private sector does not get anything near that as a raise, but yet the private sector has to pay for that. Where's the justice in all of this? Or the pay your fair share? That's all.
Hi, I'm Andrea Duquette, because I think we were all supposed to identify ourselves. But it seems like a lot of the issue is with the state, and you mentioned you were going to go with Jane Corwin and Mike Ratzenhofer. I know in the past you've had materials available on the website for people to help advocate for change at the state level, and I know that was a big issue last year, that you wanted change made on the state level. Again, are there going to be materials available?
Yes.
I encourage everyone in this room to actually use those materials and call your legislators. And I mean, a lot of our hands are tied here, it seems.
And Dr. Hicks and I will be meeting with Corwin and Rosenhofer in the month of February.
I think I'd make the point too, that our state senator and our, assemblywoman have stood up for us. I think they're on the right side of the issue, and so it is good that they hear from us and let us know where we stand on it, because they have gone to bat for us and will continue to do so, I think. So let's let them know where we stand.
Contact your elected officials about getting the rest of the GEA money back. It's taxes that you've paid that are being withheld from our budget.
As stated, the GEA was put into place to help curb the deficit and the debt in the state. And we can all sit here and discuss the ulterior motives of that legislation, whether it was truly intended for that, because I personally don't believe that Albany's ever been out to cut taxes for New Yorkers. But the GEA is and could still be a good tool for taxpayers to use to leverage against some of these laws that have been created that create an uphill battle for taxpayers, such as the Triborough Amendment, such as the laws for pensions, okay? And to just sit here and I know every school district in the state is foaming at the mouth for this money. I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do. The state right now is $362 billion in debt. That's $18,000 per person. So there's no safeguard in place to prevent history from repeating itself. Our senators, Ransenhofer, Gallivan, our assemblywoman, Jane Corwin, they're perfectly content with just signing this money over, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, with absolutely no safeguard. And it's important to note that the taxpayers got absolutely nothing in return for forking this money over. There was no change in the Triborough Amendment. There's no reform for benefit contributions, no changes to the tax law, nothing. So you tell me, if the school district gets all this money back, how are we going to prevent history from repeating itself? It's a vicious cycle that we have here in New York State.
I'm not sure I entirely understand what you're looking for. I mean, it sounds like you're saying that the gap in elimination adjustment is a tool to help convince school boards to change the state constitution, and that's the part I'm confused about.
No, I'm talking about at a state legislative level.
Yeah, and I think that we can all agree that at the state level there are a variety of challenges. The challenge that this board has, however, is to focus on how do we make sure our budget is balanced, that we meet the needs of our community, and that we do it in a cost-effective way. And again, within the variables that we have under our control, we have a history of doing that. And I think that the slides that Dr. Hicks presented kind of show that. I'm not necessarily arguing your point about the challenges at the state level, but laying those at the feet of this board is kind of misplaced, because there are very little things that we can do beyond the advocacy things that we're actively working on, and that any citizen.
No,
can do.
I'm not blaming necessarily the school board for this, but let me ask you this. In your budgeting process, I'm sure everybody on the board, Dr. Hicks, as well as all the other administration, would agree that there are several mandates from Albany that are crushing the budget and crushing local schools. Why didn't our legislators agree in some sort of compromise to repeal some of this in order to, like I say, prevent history from repeating itself?
I think you'd have to ask
Them.
I mean, I will say that both the School Board Association, they come out with a legislative agenda. We have the opportunity to look at those things. These are things that are recommendations at the state level about concerns that many school boards, including ours, have at the state level. So there are a variety of lobbying efforts that take place on exactly those kinds of topics. And then where we have the ability to influence within our local constituencies, and even at a broader level, we attempt to do that. But can we coerce them? No, not at all. I mean, if I could have them do exactly what we wanted, that might be wonderful.
In fact, it's not going to be the school board's position to do that. It's going to be the taxpayer's position to do that. And it's the job of the legislature to represent the people of New York and the taxpayers, which they didn't do by repealing the GEA. They didn't represent the taxpayers there. They gave hundreds of millions of dollars back to a system that's punishing taxpayers. And nobody here might not agree with that. But That's,
Well, I guess the only point I would make, and I don't want to belabor this, is that there may be a variety of districts that are, that have excesses that you're not satisfied with, how they spend the money that was actually pulled out of their allocation via the GEA. But I think when you look at as much of a third-party impartial judge as we've got, which is Business First at the moment, and they are saying that we have a very high ranking for efficiency, and you stack that next to the results of our teachers and our students, I think that speaks for itself. Now, again, we can discuss a variety of things at the state level, and we can talk about generalizations, but the specific cases with this specific board and this specific district, that's what we have to be most concerned about here.
And the holding back of those funds directly impacts the funds that we have to go out to taxpayers that live in Clarence to get.
but President Claus, you know that that state aid is tax money as well.
Absolutely.
Where does the state
But you've
get
already
the tax?
paid the gap elimination funds have already gone
I
out there.
think-
So if we got our share, the 1.3 would be less.
I think the point, Mr. Lombardo, is, and from my perspective, great, we applaud any time the state cuts taxes, but they should do it evenly across and in this particular case, they've done it, on our school disproportionately, and on our backs disproportionately. Any cuts, any restoration should be done evenly to all school, and the GEA hasn't treated us as Clarence residents fairly. So all we're asking for, we're not necessarily asking for more taxes that the state government spend more, but when they restore, it should be done evenly and it should be done fairly to all school districts, not just picking out who they like and giving it to them. And that's where we want, I would think, is where we want our legislators to act on our behalf, is say, hey, treat Clarence fairly. That's what we want. If that makes any sense.
I don't necessarily see it that way. I think there should have been a compromise in place, because certainly the public sector unions wanted this money restored. They were one of the biggest lobbyists for it, okay? And the taxpayers got nothing in return for handing every $3 out of $4 of the money goes to personnel costs, the unions, and the taxpayers got nothing in return for handing over hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, back to Mr. Stock's point about Business First. Unfortunately, most people in the area, most taxpayers, are not concerned with the rankings of Clarence within Western New York in terms of efficiency. They're more focused on getting us on a national competitive level so that our families don't leave town, so that we don't have to sell our homes, so that I can afford to live in Clarence. We're not, you're comparing us to the best of the losers. And that's all I'm going to say.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Has anyone on the board or the board, has anyone ever tried to fight these mandates? Or tried to, maybe fight is the wrong word, but have you done
Advocacy,
anything
yes.
to try to give us relief from these mandates?
Of course.
Like what? Like what are some of the things?
I've written letters the last several years.
Pardon?
We were on committees I'm on a legislative committee with Western New York districts at BOCES. I've written letters the last several years. I'll be meeting with our state senator and assemblyman in the next month.
I'm
concerned that the mandates are very harmful.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
I know.
I was just at a meeting Thursday night. We were working on stuff to put out there, petitions to get working. So there's a website that's going to come about, Erie County School Boards. It should be launched sometime, and you can click on, and their petition will be on there, and you can help too.
I'm assuming the ultimate decision lies with the governor. But, I mean, can we as a group do anything
Of course.
to help?
You can write letters and make phone calls and do all the same things that we're doing.
And when I've talked with some of our local legislators, Ray Walter and Jane Corrin and Mike Ranzenhofer, they're just as frustrated as you are. The New York State School Board Association, their position is against things like the Triborough Amendment, and they advocate against these mandates. But it's not just the people of Clarence that have a say in it. The legislature is in all of New York State, and sometimes the downstate interests are different altogether than the interests that we have here. And we have to overcome, I mean, the legislators themselves, you know, it's not just 4 or 5 people that make that decision. It's the full assembly and the full Senate that make those decisions. And
Jason, who's the opposing force in the state against mandate relief?
Yeah.
well, I mean, I would encourage you to look at the voting records in the assembly and the Senate and make your own determination
Well,
on
who are
it.
they representing?
Who are they representing?
Yeah, I don't think they give one hoot or another
I mean-
what goes on in schools because they have other jobs. So who are they representing?
Well, I mean, that'll be to each individual's interpretation, you know, on how you want to interpret
Well,
that.
it would seem to me that if the school board was really focused on fighting these mandates, we would target the opposition to this, right?
I mean, they're not in our legislative districts, but
Oh, of course they're
we
not.
could, I mean, that's something that you could do.
No, that's something that we should do.
Yeah.
If the school board was really focused on that, because what I see is a lot of, oh, we have this mandate, we need more money to fund this mandate. It's not, we need to get rid of this mandate, we just want more money.
Well, in general, the way mandates work, right, is the first year the government says, oh, we want this mandate, but don't worry, we'll pay you for it. And that's how it starts. And then a few years later, they may or may not pay for it, but now you're stuck with it. So, you know, I mean, I suppose if we, you know, but now, you know, as a school district, we get $20 million from the state. So, you know, if you don't follow the state mandates, you'd lose $20 million. So we're kind of stuck on that. So we're required, you know, we're dependent on the legislatures to change things, you know, change the laws.
In other words, nobody's getting representation.
It would seem that way sometimes.
It always is.
But that's the way the
Go ahead.
system works. You know, the way the system, the society that we live in, you know, it depends on us, you know, and you look at what's happened recently with, you know, the Common Core thing. Now, that had its own issues, but there were enough people and enough groups that rallied, and they were able to change things. They were able to change some of the mandates. So it's not impossible, I would say that, but it takes some dedicated people and some dedicated groups to go at it. It has happened, but, you know, we probably need it to happen more.
Ms. Andrews, could you expand on what you were saying about a petition and the meeting you went to the other night?
Right,
please?
we spent about 2 hours creating a petition to go to the governor about the GEA, getting some of the money back to us, about the tax cap, about different agendas. And it's gonna be on, they're releasing a website, the Erie County School Board, if you can go right onto that, and you'll see the petition. It will be on there, and then you can copy it and send it in to the governor as well.
But it wasn't anything about the mandates, though. That was just
Yeah,
about the GEA?
there's mandate relief. We're asking for, their letter has about 5 different things we're asking for.
Oh, okay. And where's it going to be? On the
Erie County
Clarence-
School Board website.
Oh, Erie County School Board's
Yep.
website? Okay, thanks.
There's a lot of great information there.
Oh, okay, good.
Any other questions? Okay, so just to wrap up, our next meeting is in February.
Dr. Hicks,
Sure, Mr.
can I bring up a couple questions?
Sure thing.
All right, sorry, I was letting the public go. I thought we'd have some board discussion. First question has to do with the 0.7%. Right, Rick? You know, Mr. Mancuso? There's 0.7% that's included in the levy calculation that basically comes from last year. So last year, the calculated levy was at 4.7% or something, and we ended up at 3.9. So that chunk of money is available for us to use in this year's calculation, which is where we get this 0.7%, correct?
Correct.
So, you know, in some respects, it could be considered like a double jeopardy. We didn't pay it last year, but now we're gonna pay it this year. But my question is, all right, it's kind of a one-off trick, isn't it? You know, we're using that this year, you know, to get the funding. What are we gonna do next year if we don't have that trick?
Right. Well, we won't be able to use that trick. But we didn't calculate the formula on how to create the cap. New York State created the formula. New York State allows rollover money, which is what you're referring to.
Yes, correct.
The amount of money that you were below the cap the previous year in a one-year-only scenario can apply to the next year.
So, I mean, next year, we might be looking at a cap of like low 2%.
It really depends on the three factors:
You know,
state growth, town growth,
Yeah.
debt service.
could be less even.
It could be. It could be 2, it could be less than 2.
Okay. Now, you know, one of the things is, I would expect that we're gonna get more money from the state. You know, in our initial budget here, we took the governor's number, and we know from past experience, they always negotiate and meet somewhere in the middle. Last year, we ended up with $1.1 million more. Maybe we'll be lucky and get that again this year, I don't know. But I expect we'll get some more money. So what I'd like us to see, you know, is maybe we can use that towards reducing that levy, you know, so the taxpayers aren't necessarily paying that whole 0.7%. Maybe we reduce that to 0.5 or something like that.
Sure. And I'd say the other potential uses for it would be mitigate the appropriated fund balance increase and/or make a consideration about restoring programs or people.
Now, one question last year when we talked about the buses, I know this is everybody's favorite. Last year was about $1 million, a little bit under. I don't remember the exact number, 989. But anyhow, and last year some of the discussion was this year we don't need it. We didn't expect that we'd need as much. So I'm happy to see we're a couple $100,000 under that last year. I think we'd still like maybe in the next budget presentation we'll talk a little bit like how we had last year, some of the numbers of the fleet and age and stuff like that. Is that possible, Rick?
Absolutely. I think last year, if you remember, John Weidman, our transportation supervisor, gave a nice little presentation which summed up everything that we do at the bus garage fleet-wise.
Yep.
and some of the needs for the bus replacement plan to be a steady program. I certainly can have him update that for the next board meeting.
And just to build on that, looking back at last year's presentation, he had a multi-year projection, and I believe he estimated 10. So
Right.
based on some positive work in the maintenance garage and maintaining the fleet, we've actually reduced that number by 1 for at least this proposal.
Yes, correct.
And maybe, you know, maybe as part of that would be good to talk a little bit about the new software we're using. Maybe it's too early yet, but if he has any data on that, that'd be neat to see.
Good idea.
Great, thanks. That's it.
Just one clarification for the February meeting. Is
Sure.
that when we will see the updated enrollment projections
Yes.
and class sizes?
Yes, we'll have enrollment, class size, by building, by level, in addition to any new information that comes in on the revenue side.
And the information on the incoming kindergarten. That'll show
Correct.
the
Census for
projected
kindergarten,
increase.
incoming kindergarten. Brennan?
Okay.
Just a quick question, going back to Roger's point about funding ultimately coming in a little higher than anticipated from the state. Does the district at this point have an opinion in regards to program and position restoration, given the fact that we're only 11 up relative to 102 down?
Right. It's a Board of Education decision in the final analysis. The board has been presented with some information about where we would prioritize positions to come back. We think that the very first priority is the unappropriated fund balance increase and trying to mitigate that. We also have some, before we get into teaching positions, we have some cleaners, bus mechanics that we've really put off too long, and we would put them at a priority level. But then we also have teaching positions by level prioritized for the Board of Ed. They will get that information, and it'll be up to them to have those considerations. But we've gotten that from our supervisors and administrators.
I think we really need to just wait and see how much money it really turns out to be.
But I think we do feel that there's some maintenance needs that, you know, are a priority. You know, I think it is important we take care of the buildings, and so that might be before it, but that's discussions down the road.
The only thing I'd throw out is we'll know retirements at the February meeting. If we don't reach that number of 10, then we're going to have an imbalance, and we will present you with how we would rectify that particular imbalance. So, did any of the other board members have a request for the February meeting? Okay. Great. Any other questions from the community? Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for coming out.
Have a good evening.